time we try to make use of a different technology to multi-stream on several platforms. Curious to see how that will work out in the end.
It's always a learning curve, but that's what's so fun about trying out new tools and new systems in general. I feel the better their user experience, the steeper, but also the more fulfilling the learning curve is.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect analogy of entrepreneurship to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So, hey, Cédric, since we last spoke, that was about a month ago, if I remember correctly. You launched Tomahawk VC back then, about a month ago. So what happened since we last spoke?
Yeah, time flies, I would have said. It's only been maybe 2 weeks, but I think you're right. It's been 4 or 5 weeks already. That day we officially launched. Of course, we have been working on deals before. So the last 4 weeks have actually been super busy. We closed 2 investments. We've, of course, gotten a lot of deal flow since the announcement. So we've seen lots of exciting entrepreneurs, teams, and startups. And then, of course, we've also chatted with a ton of potential co-investors, not just from Europe, but also a lot of them in the US and in Asia. So it's definitely been busy. I think I ran a statistic on my calendar the other day, and I think within 4 weeks, I took 1 week off to do a think week where I only worked on long-term stuff. And then the other 3 weeks combined, I had 150 calls, so 10 calls per day on average. I think it's very productive, but it's also like before Corona, this probably wouldn't have happened. So I definitely had to get used to the amount of calls and meetings per day.
Before we talk about your investment decisions and so on, I'm really curious, to learn more about your productive hacks in that sort. So how do you actually stay productive with 150 phone calls?
Yeah, so I prepare the calls the night before, because when I have them, I only have calls in the afternoon. Usually it's between 1 p.m. and about 10 p.m. And often they're back to back. So I take time the night before to go through all the calls I have the next day, to read up in our CRM. What have I last talked to this person about? When was our last touch point? Who else in the team has talked to them? Mm-hmm. I look at the pitch text again. I write down questions. And that's usually a pretty good preparation. I then go to sleep, and my brain does the rest overnight. And then the next day I feel pretty prepared. And in order to stay productive, I cut my day in half. Usually the mornings I use for myself, meaning proactive long-term work. And then the afternoon and evening, I go into reactive mode and I have calls and meetings.
What is like the long-term work that you do in the morning? Do you have an example for that?
Yeah, for example, building out our CRM was a big topic. Then also last week I spent a bit of time thinking about where do we want to be with Tomahawk in 2 years from now? And then backtrack from there and see what do we have to do now, today, next month, the next 6 months in order to reach those goals. And then a lot of it is just also writing about how we want to structure the team. We're currently looking to hire 1 or 2 more people to bring on the investment team. All of that takes time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm also curious to learn more about your Think Week that you mentioned in the beginning. How does a Think Week? I only know it from the Bill Gates documentary where he goes far away from the cities and just reads a lot of stuff. How does a Think Week for Cédric look like?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I watched the documentary during that week and saw that he had chosen, or I had chosen the exact same term as him. I'm not sure if I had heard it before or if it was just coincidence or if it's just a natural term, but for me, the way it looks like, Monday, I first started with, so first of all, I took a week off, meaning I cleared my calendar and I basically told everyone that I was working with that I would like to be disturbed as little as possible, to have as much time as possible to think during that week. Mm-hmm. And then Monday morning, I started by going on a long walk, thinking about what are the top 3 priorities right now. So if I can only make progress in 3 areas, what are those 3 areas? Came up with those. Among them was what I just mentioned. Then in addition to that, also processes and systems. So I think there's a lot of things that we've developed in the team over time, but we had never really taken the time to write it down and put it into a process and kind of package it and polish it. And I realized that it still created a lot of friction in our daily lives. We still discussed things kind of between calls and between meetings. So I took time to write about that as well. So those were my top 3 priorities. And then Monday afternoon until Friday, I basically tried to work on those as much as possible. I kept my phone shut off. I kept my email client closed. At first, I tried to work on paper, but then realized that's just not, it doesn't work for me. I need to be on my laptop. I like to go and research stuff on the web. So it required quite a bit of discipline to keep email and WhatsApp shut. But it was very fulfilling. I managed to do a pretty good job on 3 out of the 5 days. And then Wednesday and Thursdays, both afternoons, I kind of got pulled into emergency meetings and calls and feedback and reading proofreads in our email client. So it wasn't perfect, but it was definitely a very good start to make meaningful progress in some of these long-term initiatives.
Cool. Is there any surprising, outcome that also was part of the whole Think Week that you didn't expect in the beginning? It was so fulfilling to create stuff. So for our CRM, we're building something custom made that's tailored for our process. And I'm writing part of the software myself, and for some parts we're working with a freelancer. And that was just incredibly fulfilling to be back on the keyboard, hacking stuff together, trying stuff, building data sets, thinking about how to structure data, building import scripts and stuff. I mean, nothing huge, but just something that I hadn't been able to do in the last I do weekend projects from time to time, but I hadn't really been coding on anything that would go into production in probably like 3 years. So that was actually super fulfilling, or more fulfilling than I would have guessed it would be. That's a very nice outcome, I would say. So also talking about outcomes, since we last spoke, you mentioned 2 investments that you made with Tomahawk.vc. One of them is Locati. Why did you invest in that company? What convinced you as an investor?
Yeah, just for those that don't know, Locati is building analytics done very simply based on Wi-Fi infrastructure. Their target group is mostly Fortune 500 companies that have sometimes dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of buildings all over the world. And for them, it's very hard to get a good understanding of how their buildings are actually used. There are some solutions on the market that require the installation of sensors or vision data, but to kind of imprecise, and they require quite a bit of setup cost. Plus, installing a sensor in front of an employee just has this component of the employee feeling spied on, which is definitely not a good feeling. So what really convinced me about Locati was that they found a very elegant solution. They're plugging into the Cisco Wi-Fi infrastructure that most of these companies already use. And that way they're able to set up a building in India without ever once traveling to India, or basically anywhere in the world. So that simplicity and elegance was really convincing to me. And then on top of that, I had gone to ETH with one of the founders. So we have known each other for about 15 years. I trust him to do a good job. And then I had also been speaking with the team for more than a year until we closed the investment. So I felt pretty certain that it was a good bet on the team. And I also had time to see how the product developed over that time and how their sales pipeline developed, which both made me were promising to me.
Awesome. So the traction in between the different timestamps basically also was very convincing.
Yeah, that traction, I mean, when it comes to B2B SaaS businesses, I think there's 2 core components. One is you have to be able to build the product, and then you have to be able to sell the product, right? And sales is typically where I think Swiss companies are less strong. So that's what I pay a bit more attention to see how they approach it over time. Plus, we've also made the investment in a very interesting time, right? When most people were sent home to work from home for the first time. So it's also been an interesting time since then, since we made the investment, to just continue the discussion of what does the future of workplace analytics look like, and what does the workplace in that equation look like?
Absolutely. What was also astonishing to me is you co-invested basically with another former Swisspreneur guest, with Philipp Stauffer and his Firefly Ventures. Yeah. And, just out of curiosity, I heard that it can be pretty difficult to get into the good deals because everybody wants to do the good deals, right? So is there any take from your side on this? I mean, obviously you need a founder, so that might have help, but how do you actually get into the good deals as a VC and make sure that you don't miss out on them?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's basically the name of the game for venture capital, right? Is recognizing good deals and then also being able to make good deals. So Philip and I have been not only business partners, but friends for a few years now. When I spend time in the Bay Area, I usually visit him or we go out for dinner and vice versa when he's in Switzerland. So I think from a mindset perspective, we've always been aligned. We are aligned on a lot of topics. Mm-hmm. And then I think it always comes down to what you can bring to the table. I think Philip and I have different skill sets, different things that we can work on with the founders, and that ultimately makes us a good team to come in on deals together. In this example, we even decided to lead together. So we both worked on the terms. We were on all the calls, negotiating the round with the founders together, which is also a great experience to get to know each other better.
Absolutely. And I know this is probably a question that you get a lot, but it's still interesting for founders, but also for aspiring venture capitalists. How do you actually spot a good deal?
Yeah, so when we look at a deal, I think there's basically three areas that we look at. There's market, product, and team. And market and product, I think, are easier to have the same opinion within the team because it's more objective. It's easier to work with data and hard facts. So I'm not going to talk about those. But then team, I think, is always where opinions can go to complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And over time, in Tomahawk, we've developed a model how we try to communicate qualities that we see in a founder. And it's by far not perfect, but I think what we do want to understand and analyze is orthogonal dimensions in a founder's qualities. What I mean by that, very complicated word for basically different qualities that are not correlated with each other. For us, it's clarity, empathy, and execution. What that means, number one, clarity. Can the founder be very concise and get to the point quickly? We think that's important because it will help them scale their vision, scale their sales, scale their hiring, everything. Mm-hmm. Number two, empathy. We believe that founders that are going to build really big companies, they need to be able to get people behind them that believe in not only the vision, but also in that founder and naturally just want to follow that founder. And third, execution, what we talked about earlier, like can the founder actually move the needle in the early days of the project? Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things that we discuss. But then, of course, there's always going to be at least, I'd say 30 to 50%, which is gut feeling. That part involves how do I think about the team? Will they be able to scale themselves? How will they be able to develop into different roles as the company grows? What do I think about the market in general? How quickly will it grow? Do I personally feel that they are solving a big enough problem? So lots of questions where it's hard to have a data-driven discussion. And I think ultimately there's a portion of luck as well in finding the right deals and making them at the right time.
Sure. How do you actually test for the three criteria that you just mentioned before? Is there any sort of test or assessment that you go through with the founders to really, test them for that?
So we try not to have a rigid system where it's like those 5 questions and then we calculate a score based on them. But we just try to keep these areas in the back of our mind as we're talking to the founders, okay, and then come up with questions that give us pointers. So when it comes to clarity, that one's obvious, right? If I ask the founder a question about, one question that I like to start with is, tell me about why this problem is personally so important to you. Mm-hmm. Why are you working on this specific project? And then if there's a clear story that's like leading to a clear end, that already tells me that the founder has gone through this hundreds and thousands of times. Same for pretty much any other question. If I see that the founder doesn't just start talking, but he actually has some logic prepared in his head, and it's ready to just be thrown at me. That's usually a sign that the person thinks about it day and night. Empathy, I usually I spend a bit of time with the founders in their office. Of course, this is pro-corona, where we talk to teammates, we talk to key people in the business, and often we get a good idea of what the company culture is like, and if they follow the founder naturally, or if there's some sort of dynamics going on. And execution, as I mentioned, we track the company over time.
Absolutely. You know, another important point that I think many founder teams also sort of establish as value for themselves is transparency. So I'm also curious, going beyond the founder values and the company values, what role does actually transparency play for the investment process?
So my general approach to transparency is always that you should always be as transparent as possible without hurting anyone, including yourself. So I'm not a transparency maximalist, but I think I'm a transparency optimist. I like to think that we can all be more transparent than we naturally are, because it's just interesting. I think from everything that I share with others, be it founders or co-investors, or even with you and the audience here right now, I get a lot of feedback as well, and that helps me get better. That's my reason why I'm trying to be transparent as possible. So in that sense, I think within Tomahawk, we're still a small team right now. We're 3 people and an additional 3 when you look at the extended team right now. It's very small and easy to keep everything transparent, but then also when it comes to us growing and the 2 or 3 year outlook, I do want to keep a very high level of transparency, because I think that's also a core component of how you build team culture and trust in each other.
Right. Yeah, fully agree. Closely linked to transparency is also saying no when you actually want to say no. A startup can say no, for example, to an investment proposal, which might at the same time also be a very difficult move, because you might want to work together in the future. So do you have any suggestion or tips for startups that would like to keep the relationship with the potential investor, but say no to the existing investment proposal at hand?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because more often I'm confronted with the opposite, right? Where we have to turn down founders. If I think of how would a founder best do that with us, and obviously it's happened in the past, I think often it comes down to facts. Often, at least when we've been turned down or rejected by founders in the past, they were very transparent about the reasons, which was great for us, because then we understood whether it was something personal or if it was just better terms that they got offered elsewhere. And I think I even prefer that over founders that try to play this game of one-upping one investor against the other, where they come back with a counter offer and then basically they use our term sheet to get a better offer from another investor. I think that doesn't usually help build a good long-term relationship. If a founder is transparent and there's good reasons for them, or bad reasons, but honest reasons for them not to go with us at the time, I think there's nothing that will prevent me from investing in the future, as long as the investment down the road is still in our investment focus, meaning the right stage, right size of the round and stuff like that.
Right. You mentioned one of the reasons why founders said no to an investment proposal to you, for example, or also to others, was better terms that they got elsewhere. What are other reasons why they say no to a deal, an investment offer?
I think startups that are in a great position where they can choose from multiple investors and where the round is oversubscribed. A reason might be our network. They might go with an investor. They might think that they want to have a US investor lead the round versus us based in Switzerland because of strategic reasons. It might be that they prefer a larger fund that has the tendency to follow on or be able to lead even the next round thereafter. I think that comes with a caveat as well, because then there's also outside pressure that that's going to happen. If that doesn't happen, it's usually a bad signal. Same as from our end, there might not be the right chemistry to decide to take us as an investor. luckily that hasn't happened, or at least that has not been communicated to me in the past when someone rejected us. But I think that's a very valid reason as well. Because ultimately you work together a lot. There's a lot of trust involved. You need to be able to feel very safe and trustworthy with each other. So I think that's as good as any other reason. And then there's also a component of, I guess, potential competitions. If an investor, it's never been the case for us, but if, let's say, we're invested in Longterm and now there's a company that's maybe not a direct competitor, but definitely in the same space and working towards a very similar vision, although from a different angle, then that's also understandable that they might not want to take money from us and share all their data with us. Got it.
Is that something, but from an investor perspective, that you would say that's totally fine, that's totally doable, investing in like competing companies?
I think it depends on your involvement. We wouldn't invest in two companies that have the same vision and overlap geographically, and take a very active or similar role in both. If we were to make a very passive investment that doesn't give us much information rights into one company when we're actively involved with another one, and they're not geographically overlapping, and there's no reason to think that they will be in the next 5 years, then I think it's a different story. Then I think it can help as someone that just invests in a certain vertical or in a certain industry, then I think that's plausible. But making clearly competing bets, I think, would not be the right move for me.
Yeah, that also re-emphasizes the importance of really, investing enough time to really finding the good deal, especially if there might be several startups serving a similar or the same market with a similar vision. Because if you can only invest in one, it gets over proportionally more important to select the right one, right?
I agree, and I think it's also a skill of an investor to just sit out sometimes and just watch the market and educate themselves. I'm planning to do more think weeks because it was such a rewarding experience, and I also want to do weeks where I just, similar to what you mentioned about Bill Gates, where I just read a lot more. Often I feel I'm so plugged into just calls and meetings, and my schedule is so full that I don't get enough time to just follow the market and build my own opinion, verify our thesis against current market sentiments. I think that's important too. Of course, it's two different, there's FOMO, and then there's being able to sit out and just watch the market. And I think in the end, it's a bit of an art or the trick of the trade to be able to manage those two and balance them out.
Right. Yeah, that's also what makes the investor job interesting, but also tricky at the same time. So let's also talk about the different topic that you are very passionate about, and that was heavily pushed by COVID-19, the whole remote work movement, basically. So many companies that thought it's impossible to work from home were actually pushed to make that happen, to make it possible. You have preached that for quite a long time already, I think, and also not only preach it, but also live it with Tomahawk VC, where you actually all work fully remote. Do you have any success tips how actually remote teams can succeed?
So I guess my first tip would be figure out what works for you. And I say that because I think remote is not a one-fits-all, or there's not this style of remote that fits every company and every founder and every team. I think it's important to figure it out in your team and also be very open-minded to discuss challenges and iterate all the time. For example, Dfinity, I think it was very hard to work purely remote just because we had all these brilliant minds and we all profited so much from them being in the same room, being in front of a whiteboard and being creative with each other. Whereas for Zendesk, it worked really well because the problem that we were solving was less a creative problem, it was more of an execution problem, applying best practices to different parts of business. Personally, the things that make it work for me is to consciously plan time to talk to each other as human beings. What I mean by that is don't just talk to each other as coworkers or colleagues, but make time to talk about stuff that's outside work. So Could be to spend some time each week to discuss movies with each other or do a book club together. Anything that gives you a perspective on the human being and not just the colleague. So that's one thing. Then second, I think it's being very proactive with your schedule and communication of what you're doing when, so that there's never a moment where people are trying to reach you and you have gone out for lunch. I personally, at the beginning of the week, on Sunday evening, I plan my week and I put calendar blockers for when I'm having dinners, so that my team always knows when they can just call me and I pick up the phone, and other times when they will not reach me because I am either off or in a call or meeting right now. Mm-hmm. And then also, like, we're trying to have fun with it. So with Tomahawk, for example, what we're doing right now is every morning we do silent work together. What that means is we keep the audio channel open. We use an app called tandem.chat, where you can create different rooms. We have one that's called silent work, or you could have one that's called one-on-ones or water cooler. But for us, we're all in the same room, and we keep the audio channel open in the background, even without having a meeting. So that way I kind of hear my coworkers when they're typing. And it creates this extra layer of immediacy. Like I can talk to Claude and Boyan as if they were in the same room. It kind of creates environment as if we were all in this room working together, and I can hear that they're sitting behind me even though I can't see them. But if I need to know something, I can just turn around and ask them the question. And that's something that I think is pretty interesting. We're still fine-tuning it. We're doing it for about 3 to 4 hours each day. And it gives me a very good idea of whether someone is sad, whether someone is super happy, energetic, or tired. And that gives me a very important layer that allows me to tailor my communication with them.
Yeah, I think that's a very good and smart way of, bringing this human connection back to remote work. We also use that at one of our teams. We just do it with Skype, including video. So usually you are muted, but then you can just unmute yourself to just chat with anybody if you have a question, like if they were sitting next to you. So I think that's a very good way of bringing that feeling back.
Yep.
So, you want to add something? You were just like...
Just one thing that just came to mind that I like about this tandem.chat is that it has an integration with business apps. So, for example, when I'm on Google Sheets or when I'm using Notion or Slack, it does show to my team members which app I'm using and what page I'm in right now. And they can request to jump into the same screen. And it's been helpful a couple of times because I saw that, Boyan is working on this and that document. And I was able to say, hey, let me quickly jump over to you and go through it together before you do too much work, because I have some ideas to share in that as well. I'm not sure if it's a must-have feature or anything that would require me to switch from Skype or Zoom or any other pure video chat solution, but it's been something that's been fun, at least. And it's free right now. They went on a completely free plan in beginning of COVID, so it's free for anyone to try.
Cool. Yeah, so definitely I think we will also give it a shot to just see how this additional feature would help us. Cool. So another thing, usually you travel quite often, although you do have an apartment right now in Switzerland. I'm just curious, like, how do your next 3 months look like? Because due to COVID, travels will probably still be restricted. So I'm a bit afraid that you might get bored here in Switzerland.
Well, I'm moving tomorrow. I have to do military service for 3.5 weeks. So at least in that sense, I'll have a temporary home for the next 3 weeks or so. Plus, Milena and my wife and I have been starting to do weekend trips. Last week we spent some time in the south of Switzerland, Ticino, to go on a longer hike. We're doing the same thing in another part of Switzerland next weekend. So that's been plenty of. I realize it's important for me to get back out and especially do some physical activities, reconnect with nature. And at some point, I almost felt like I was just in need of an adventure. overall, the next 3 months, I'm not sure how long the borders are going to stay closed. I mean, I think now we're close to the borders to the surrounding countries reopening. I'm not in need to travel, but if possible, probably this summer, I would go somewhere for a month or two and just work from a different country. One thing that's on my list is to go somewhere where people speak Russian to help me advance my Russian, which is kind of gone back to non-existent right now, but it's high up on my list for July onwards. Other than that, I'm not sure. I'm not stressed to travel. I'm not anxious to travel. But if it does come up, we'll probably go somewhere for a few weeks.
I think.
How about yourself?
I mean, yeah.
What are your plans for the next few months?
To be honest, I really enjoyed the time of not traveling at the moment and spending more time in nature. I think that's a very positive side effect of the whole thing. But then, I mean, I'm also excited to be able to travel again, even if it's just within Switzerland, because I think there are so many beautiful, nice spots here that we still haven't discovered that offer plenty of things to do. So for me, it's really also cool to spend more time in nature, and I think I will continue that until the borders open, and hopefully also a bit beyond that.
Yeah, it's actually, I think I share your thinking in regards to Switzerland. Like obviously I was born and raised here, and I've lived here for the first 20 years of my life. And my parents took me on many beautiful hikes. But I think, but that's like a couple of decades ago since I was really actively hiking here every weekend or so. I think that's actually a really cool challenge, is to kind of rediscover Switzerland this summer. And the weather has been so good lately that it's just a natural thing to do, to go outside and spend some time in nature. Yeah,
it's very inviting. And I also think now, it's probably getting more important with whom you spend time and what you spend your time on, like reading, for example, for your Think Week, for example, and less important than I would have probably thought a couple of years back of where you actually go. So I think the quality is way more determined by the people you spend time with and what you actually do, to have time to study, to have time to do something for yourself, and way less important where you actually do that.
And I think that's an interesting side effect of Corona, is that we all become a bit more, at least that's what I've seen with my friends, we become a bit more proactive about and selective about who we spend time with, right? When you have all these summer parties and big events, it's so easy to just be reactive and say, yes, I accept that invite and I go here because I've been invited. And now, first, I think we were all forced to make very conscious decisions about how many people do we see and who do we see. And I think that can lead to much more proactive selection of who you spend your time with, which is something that I've discovered during those years when I was homeless and I was traveling so much. My friends wouldn't really think that I would be in Switzerland anymore, so I didn't get invited to birthday parties and other celebrations, which sounds a bit sad, but was actually really good for me, because then I was completely in charge of proactively thinking about who to spend time with and who do I want to interact with.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm just very curious to see how things will go once everything gets back to some sort of normal. And, it's actually possible and also allowed again to see many people, or unlimited people if you wish to do so. I'm really not so sure how things will actually still be different to what we see now, or just really go back to normal because people just get pulled back into their old habits.
I think it could depend a lot on how we handle the second wave. So I'm not a scientist and I haven't done too much research on COVID, but to me it just makes sense that once you do open up again and people start to mingle more and more, there will be the curve will rise again. Yeah. And I think it will all depend on how we're going to handle that second wave, and also how much of a story it will still be at that point, how impactful that will be. If it just slightly rises and then kind of stays steady, I think there's really good chances of everything going back to normal by the end of the year. But if there's a second crisis, then I'm not so sure how long we'll be dealing with these special circumstances.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there are different scenarios actually, also depending when a vaccine will be available, that all play a role in that regard, I guess. Yeah. Exciting times ahead, and also exciting times we live in at the moment, I would say.
Lots of opportunities as well, as always.
Where maybe that's a good question to end this session. You know, where do you see upcoming opportunities, not only as an investor, but also as an entrepreneur, that will be increasingly important? I know this is a pretty generic question, but it might give people a good hint on where to do a deep dive and dig deeper.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm personally obviously very long on this remote work topic that's gained a lot of traction through COVID, but also the last 10 years. In a more general sense, what I would ask myself if I was a founder just starting out and looking for the big idea or something to work on, I would ask myself, what has changed in our reality? And an industry that will probably be impacted for a very long time is travel and experiences in general. And I would ask myself, what is it that people have sought when they traveled and when they went for experiences and went to events? And what would be creative ways of recreating a similar, not experience, but a similar feeling? What I mean by that is that, for example, conferences, business conferences, right? Where pretty much every conference right now is canceled. Yet we still have a need to interact with each other and talk about a certain industry and share knowledge. So I think the immediate reaction is that we will be going to conferences online. And then people come up with concepts for, we're all going to wear VR goggles and we're going to walk around in our own space, but still mingle and meet each other. And I think that's too literal of a transfer of the idea. One example that spontaneously comes to mind is that could serve as an analogy is, like years ago, you had to go out and go clubbing if you wanted to be looked at, if you wanted people to wink at you, and if you wanted to feel like you're pretty and well respected and so on. And then that has kind of not replaced, but it has definitely been augmented by all the social media. Right, where now you get likes and you get comments and messages, and it serves that same human need. It plays into that same human need to feel liked and respected and connection. And I think that it'd be interesting to think about business conferences and travel in a similar scope, where I don't think it's so much about seeing a beach or being in a certain city and just seeing the building or the art that you can only see in that building. I think for that, we will always want to travel. The same way clubbing will never go away. But on a higher level, I think travel nurtures our curiosity and our thirst for new experiences and challenges in the real world. And if you think about it this way, there might be really interesting online multiplayer games or experiences or interactive courses where you learn about a historic event or about a certain geography, and that might play into the same human need as well.
I think that's a very cool way of thinking, and I would probably also add there. We were currently thinking about ideas and stuff, and there our founder Alain actually also gave us a good feedback and said you should actually probably start with your own problem or your own need as a starting point, because that's really where you have a need to create a solution that is not out there yet. And I also think that this is very important to have this intrinsic motivation to start something and then to also pull it through. So if you can combine the points that you just mentioned with the trends and how can you actually translate the experiences or the feelings that are missing into something that you're deeply passionate about or that you are missing at the moment, that might be a very interesting business model that can come up from that.
I know that you were working on, or you are working on Book a Sleeper, a startup where people can book overnight trains or seats on overnight trains. I assume it's been largely impacted by the current crisis. What is the way forward for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously all the night trains, they were shut down. So we basically had also to, stop doing marketing and so on. We actually had a pretty good start. Within 3 weeks, we were able to generate quite some bookings for our night train partners, actually way more than we expected. And then Corona hit and we had to shut down everything. Now this week, we just discussed the reopening. So luckily, the trains will actually start or continue their service from end of June onwards, at least to Switzerland and Germany. So that's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. But in between, there was actually nothing happening except some organic traffic, but not really much in terms of booking, because people are obviously also scared and not sure if they should book, if they will get reimbursed if something happens, and so on and so forth. And I think depending on the second wave that we discussed before, how that will go, we will probably be able to go back to a good offering step by step over the next couple of months, not weeks, but months. And then hopefully be able to sell more tickets again there. But yeah, it was a pretty challenging situation for us, of course, but I think especially for the train operators, because they all have the fixed costs. We were able to just reduce our ad spending and so on pretty easily and fast. But if you have employees to pay, you have your fixed inventory that you have to maintain and so on, you have a lot of costs but no revenue. And that's a way bigger challenge.
And then aside from cost cutting, what were some things, I assume you had more time because you didn't work on new marketing campaigns or building out the product further, or maybe you doubled down on the product, I don't know. What did you do with the time that freed up during the last few months?
Sure. So one thing that we did is we worked on more API connections because only at the moment we have the Austrian railways integrated, but we want to have more, like the Italian trains, for example, and so on. So that was one thing that we worked on in terms of API connections and really focusing on the technical development there. But we also reduced working hours there, obviously, because we said, hey, we don't know when this will continue, because then you don't want to invest and then it might just continue like 1 year later or so. And we were obviously also just exploring about new ideas and thinking about what else you could actually tackle and build a startup around in terms of ideas that is interesting to tackle. We're still experimenting there, and it's more like of a hobby for us, because we say, okay, we have some more time and we actually want to give it a shot and see what we can come up with. So it's more of a hobby and a play around for us.
Cool. Any areas that you're particularly excited about?
Something that is heavily also mixed with my personal interest is the whole personal finance topic. So I still think that many people, they don't really know how to spend their money or actually how to save their money, or are not optimizing it. And there are still a lot of old school ways of doing it. Like your banker calls you and says, I have this fantastic investment product. It costs you 2% per annum, which is way too high in good and bad times. You want to buy it. And then you buy it because you have this local connection. You trust the person, although you have no understanding what you're actually investing in. And you also have no real understanding whether this is actually a good product or not. But you just do that because you don't know better and you trust the people. I know that there are like robo-advisors and so on out there, but really this personal connection and thinking about how you could help people optimizing their taxes, but also their money in general, that's something where I don't have a solution yet, but where I would wish to have a solution.
And I think in Switzerland, we're always at a bit of a disadvantage because, at least from my perspective, the US and a few other countries are far ahead of us. Yeah. Because obviously, you develop a product there and you go through all the steps required to be approved by all the regulatory bodies. Yeah. You have access to a 400 million people strong market, whereas in Switzerland, it's a very fragmented 8 million people market. Is there any trend to see some of these bigger tools and apps and systems to make their way towards Europe and potentially to Switzerland?
So I think there's one big thing that is currently shifting. It's mainly pushed by the EU, and it's mainly called open banking. So it's not happening right now, but over the next probably 2 to 3 years, so still quite some time to go, but where banks will actually be, by law, will have to give access through an API to the different accounts and so on. And that will really be a game changer from my perspective, because then that will be easy that you can have access to different bank accounts all over the EU, and then such tools will be way more interesting and easily to pull off.
Mm-hmm. Cool, that's exciting.
So yeah, let's see where that will lead us. I mean, we don't we don't do anything there because we just don't have the time. But really, the personal finance idea is really interesting for us, and especially for me. And I really wish that there's someone or some solution out there that helps more people to really have their finances under control and just have therefore also a better life at the end, I guess.
So I think that's a passion that we both share. So if there's anyone listening that is also passionate and is willing to take the time to work on this, they should definitely get in touch with us.
Absolutely, 100%. Cool. Hey, that was a lot of fun, Cédric, as always with you. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think we covered a pretty wide range of topics. It's been fun, and I hope you will stay safe and productive. And in not too far of a future, we'll hopefully be able to meet in the gym as well and work out together.
Yeah, I miss our gym sessions. They were always the killer in the morning. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Cédric. Looking forward to our next session, and all the best of luck with the projects and the Think Weeks ahead of you.
Thank you. Yeah, same to you. We'll chat soon.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.